Hello Kitty, me gusta mi titties, me gusta mi booty, me tomo selfie con filtro Hello Kitty.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of Dangerous Games Podcast. I am Courtney from Reckless Cards, and this is my beautiful, stunning, lovely, perfect, light of my
Not
life,
perfect.
stars in my sky co-host Sarah, the original Mrs. Breaker, Mrs. Squirts, and you are all so lucky that she has deigned to join us in our podcast journey.
Oh my goodness. So much crap being spewed about me.
It's
Thank
true.
you.
I love you.
Oh, I love you too.
So I know that you guys have all been waiting for the finale to the Black Sox White Sox.
Oh, we're doing a finale.
Yeah,
tonight,
I could have made it into 3, but I feel like after we did the Red Downs and now the Black Sox, maybe we need to like pull ourselves out of the
Different sports.
1900s baseball and then move into something different. Like I feel like I know more about 1900s baseball than I know about modern baseball at this
Isn't
point.
that crazy?
I have done such a deep dive on this. Like
That's awesome.
the contracts, the way that the farm system worked, the first commissioner of baseball, all of the, the barnstorming, everything that went on. Frankly, 1900s baseball was more interesting than current baseball. It was just like the people, the characters. It was a wild time, and it was like a time of growth within the sport. I mean, obviously it was being formed, defined what it was as an entity, at all. So I've just done such a deep dive on it. I find it really interesting, but at the same time, I know, we're going to wrap this up and move on. Maybe eventually I will go into some of the minor characters in this because they're interesting in and of themselves, like the boxers and some of the horse racing. These could be whole episodes just of their own. So rather than just drag this out for like a series of several, we're just going to do the 2 parts and be done today. This is going to be like the finale, kind of what all went down during the trial, the aftermath for the players, and how it shaped the face of baseball. And so that's where we're going to go with it today. I hope you guys all enjoy this. It was so cool to research, and I definitely can link some cool books that I read, some articles, just interesting things that will, if you want more information about this, because like I said, this isn't even the tip of the iceberg. So this is episode 2 of the Black Sox, and it's Say It Ain't So, Joe. That's what I'm going to call this episode. Say It Ain't So, Joe. So we left off with the Sox having lost the World Series to the Reds, even though they had been largely favored to win. We've all seen upsets, right? In every sports in this day and age where you like for sure think someone's going to win and then, they don't. But back then, people automatically questioned the outcomes of these games because they were very, very, very corrupt. There was like rampant racketeering and a lack of any oversight at all in professional sports back in the early 1900s. Gambling in baseball was a hot button issue, as not only the players, but the managers and even the owners would bet freely for and even against their own teams. Wow. So in the early 20th century, you could go to a game and make a bet from your seat because the bookies would just wander around in the stadium taking bets. Now, they worked very openly, and this was just expected, which is crazy to think of that. But it's not to say you can't do that now with the legalization of like gambling in many states. You can like go on your phone and make a bet at your seat, but it's much more regulated. And it's not like the players could be like leaning over the dugout making bets with bookies on the game. Right. That was stuff that would go on in like the early 1900s.
That's so crazy.
It's so crazy. So for months after the loss, there was grumblings of a fix, right? It was just dogging them. They could not get rid of it, the rumors, the gossip. So much so that Comiskey himself put out a statement saying, I believe my boys fought the battle of the recent World Series on the level, as they have always done, and I would be the first to want information to the contrary, if there be any. I would give $20,000 to anyone unearthing information to that effect. Now, $20,000 is literally 10 times the amount of money that he would pay a player.
So who's going to snitch?
Right. To anyone unearthing information to that effect. But to a lot of people, this seemed disingenuous. And most people believe Comiskey was actually aware the game had been fixed. But the Sox went into the 1920 series with something to prove, and he didn't want to disrupt it. Like, they were crushing.
Gotcha.
So they lost. I feel like a lot of them felt bad about what they had done. And later you'll hear that several of them were like really just racked with guilt.
Wow.
But so they went into the 1920 season just like they played their hearts out, which maybe they should have done that in the 19 season. Just saying. He did, however, want to confirm his belief by hiring a private investigator to look into the finances of 7 men on his team. Eddie Cicotte, Chick Gandil, Joe Jackson, Lefty Williams, Happy Felt, Swede Reisberg, and Fred McMullen. Buck Weaver was not under suspicion at this point by, Comiskey. But it was no coincidence. Again, Comiskey saying he didn't know, but he knew the exact 7 guys to investigate who were involved. Like, how did he know if he didn't know and he didn't think and he thought they were on the level?
Something's
So
fishy.
it hadn't come out. Nobody had confessed. There hadn't been any reason for him to suspect these 7 guys, but he had private investigator, investigating them. Not Buck, but the rest of them. So I personally feel certain that he was aware that it happened and who was involved. And, he was making money on the Sox. They came back, they lost, but now they were like second chance. They were fighting for, the pennant and back-to-back series. And, who doesn't like a comeback story, right?
True.
People in Chicago, fans, owners, players, and for the most part, the media all seem to want to move on and ignore this. But with a bombshell article in December, Hugh Fullerton. Now, if you're from Chicago, Hugh Fullerton is like an absolute staple of Chicago sports history. He was like a sports writer and like very famous. He threw gas on the flames by publishing an article in the New York World. The name of the magazine was The World, called "Is This Big League Baseball Being Run for Gamblers with Ball Players In on the Deal?" Yeah. So he was like the only one that had basically the balls to be like, I think this is
Call it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Fullerton is a staple of Chicago sports history, and his scathing article stated that everyone knew, and according to Comiskey, he was taking the 7 men he suspected off the spring roster. Like, he spoke to Comiskey. Comiskey's like, I think these guys were involved, and I'm taking them off the roster. Only Gandil ended up going eventually, as we talked about in the last one, and he was the ringleader of it, according to pretty much everyone. And Comiskey did get him off the team. He was gone by the 1920 season. Comiskey knew removing the players would absolutely confirm everyone's belief about this open secret, so he ignored it. Like, I think he felt as if he took them off the team, if he removed it. And also, like, Eddie Cicotte, Lefty, Joe Jackson, like, these were his best players.
Wow.
So you're going to get rid of 3 of your very best players, and they're winning. That was going to be the end of the season if they did that. So he didn't. He played them. So Fuller even spoke to Kid Gleason, if you remember. He was the manager that everybody loved, and he was like a really above board guy, who allegedly told Fullerton he went to St. Louis and he tracked down one of the gamblers who was allegedly involved and went as far as choking the guy out at a hotel, like choked him and threatened him for him to give up information because he was convinced that he could get this information out of this guy to prove that this had happened. But according to Kid, the man wouldn't give up any information because he was afraid of being murdered like a fellow gambler who had squealed on Rothstein's other fixes. So this guy, like, clearly knew something was up, but he was too scared to talk because he knew that Rothstein would kill him. So he's like, nope, not saying a word. Gleason is strongly believed one of the most genuine men in baseball at this time. After the series, he retired from baseball, saying he didn't want to be involved until the league cleaned it up. He was sick of the gambling, he was sick of the crime, he was sick of all of it. So he left. He said he went fishing. He just was going to enjoy his life because it was too stressful. I mean, the man drove to St. Louis to choke a gambler. He was so like passionate about this. So
Yeah.
and then he's just like, nah, I'm done.
I'm gonna go fishing.
Yeah, this is too much. I'm too involved at this point. So when he freely spoke to Fullerton about the gamblers in the stands and openly bragging about fixing the game, Hugh believed him. Gleason also told Fullerton that he did everything in his power to fight the fix, threatening to pull the guys he suspected and even putting in rookie Dickie Kerr, which ended up winning them that game. You remember when he pulled him and then Dickie threw a no-hitter and they won that game? That was Kidd trying to like stop them from doing this bad thing and trying to like save them from themselves, basically. Ultimately, though, it wasn't enough. Gleason did eventually run into Abe Attell, the boxer. Do you remember the boxer? At a bar in New York. And Abe confessed to him not only that it was fixed, but that Rothstein was, in fact, the money man behind it. Yeah. Because all the way up to this point, Rothstein and all of his associates were like, he's not involved. He said no at that racetrack. You remember he loudly told us all no, that was a terrible thing to do, and he would never be involved. But now Abe Attell is at a bar telling Kidd Gleason, yeah, he did it. It was for sure him. Kidd tried to go to the press and tell a bunch of people what he had heard and what he had learned from all of his traveling, but nobody would publish it because they were afraid of being sued for libel, because there was really no proof except for Kidd Gleason until Fullerton. And even with his direct account, people did not want to believe that the series was a farce. After the article was published, now this was published in, a newspaper in New York, Baseball Magazine posted a poem, published a poem about Fullerton. And I have it here. I'm going to read it to you because they all thought he was wrong. They thought he had sour grapes, that his White Sox lost the World Series. So I'm going to read you the poem. This is an actual poem that was in a magazine in 1920 about Hugh Fullerton.
Oh my goodness.
A dopester whose first name was Hugh said the White Sox would win 5-2. But the Reds with a rush put the dope on the crush. Now the dopester still bellows boo-hoo.
Oh my God.
I had to add that in because it was
That's awesome though.
Like this is why I got so crazy about this. There's just so much interesting stuff. So now how like nowadays people fight back and forth on social media. They're publishing articles trash talking each other. So
that's awesome.
It's so funny. So the irony in all of this is that if you're from Chicago and you're a Sox fan, all you ever hear about is the White Sox throwing a series and how saintly the Cubs are. My entire life, you're a White Sox fan, only team to throw a World Series intentionally, blah, blah, blah. And I've been hearing that my whole life. First of all, it's wildly acknowledged that the Cubs had thrown the 1918 World Series against the Red Sox, and their lack of punishment is likely what emboldened the White Sox to try it. This is in the court documents from the White Sox. Like if you pull up, it's all transcribed. Right. You can read where they talk about how, the Cubs did it and they never got in trouble. They, even as the court case was going on, they were running indictments for more people. And they never did anything about the Cubs series the previous year. They never did anything about it. They're just like, oh, that's too far back,
Oh my
we don't have any laws, but we're going to call statute of limitations on the Cubs World Series.
Jeez.
So maybe that wouldn't have been 108 years, and maybe they deserve their Billy Goat curse. I'm just saying.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just saying. Further, it was an inconsequential midweek, mid-season game between the Phillies and the Cubs that ultimately brought down the White Sox. So the Cubs threw the series in 18, the Sox threw it in 19, and then the Cubs were fixing a game, like an inconsequential game, in 20. And that's what got everybody busted, was this Cubs game. So the Sox team came back in the 1920 season apparently ready to show that they were on the level. 7 of the 8 men involved in the fix were on the field, and they were fighting for yet another pennant win. So while this is going on, the Cubs game gets fixed. The Sox are like running to win the pennant and go to back-to-back series. And a tip came in on August 21st, 1920, that the Phillies-Cubs game was going to be fixed. The pitcher was going to throw the game. They pulled the pitcher. Apparently, this was the final straw, and a grand jury was convened in Cook County to look into the corruption in Major League Baseball.
Wow.
Assistant State Attorney Hartley, I'm going to say this guy's name wrong, Hartley Replogle, I apologize to him and his descendants, sent out dozens of subpoenas to baseball personalities. One of those called to testify was New York Giants pitcher Rube Benton. Benton told the grand jury that he saw a telegram in late September to a Giants teammate from Sleepy Burns, that other guy that was involved that kind of started it with Chick, stating that the Sox would lose the 1919 series. He also revealed that he later learned Scandal, Felsch, Williams, and Cincinnati were among those to fix it. Cincinnati later on, like, you feel bad for him because he, I'll go over this at the end. So once Benton said that to the grand jury, all the bricks began to crumble. That boxer from the last episode, Billy Marg, who ran money for Rothstein, he did an interview. Like, he went in and, like, I don't understand this. Like, crime is so different back then in the way that people behaved, because no criminal would ever do an interview with a newspaper now. Your lawyer would be like, don't do that.
Exactly.
But the way the lawyers behave in this case, you're just like, I can't believe this happened. It just gets crazier. It's the craziest thing. So he did an interview with the Philadelphia North American, where he laid out the entire operation. Like, he literally just told everything, and he implicated everyone. He just was like, yeah, this is what happened. This is how we did it, blah, blah, blah. Except for Rothstein. Everyone except for Rothstein. Because nobody would do that. You might not be scared of, like, the police or going to jail, but that guy was scary. Gleason later recalled that it was at this point when Cincinnati really fell apart. So Kidd, like, was still in contact with him, and Cincinnati just kind of fell apart. He was a mess. It seemed to Kidd that Cincinnati had been bothered all year, but when the grand jury and the interview came out, the guilt finally got to him, and he talked.
Wow.
He went in and he confessed, and he talked a lot. He told everything.
Jeez.
So Eddie Cincinnati cried while he recounted his involvement to the grand jury. He, like, cried on the stand, and these are like 1900s, like, manly men, and he's
grown men.
Yeah, he's crying.
Yeah.
He said, I'm gonna, like, just do his direct quote that I pulled from the court things, because it's sad. I don't know why I did it. I must have been crazy. Risberg, Scandal, and McMullen were at me for a week before the series began. They wanted me to go crooked. I don't know. I needed the money. I had the wife and the kids. The wife and the kids don't know about this. I don't know what they'll think. I've lived 1,000 years in the last 12 months. I would have not done that thing for $1 million. Now I've lost everything. Job, reputation, everything. My friends all bet on the Sox. I knew, but I couldn't tell them.
That's sad.
Yeah. So with Cincinnati folding, everyone wondered who would be the next. And as it turned out, it was Shoeless Joe Jackson. He had a private meeting with the judge, and he confessed. He said he felt like he had a load off his chest as he was leaving the courtroom. He was like, that was put in a paper that he was like, oh, I have a load off my chest. Joe was scared, though. He asked for protection when he was leaving the courtroom because fellow crooked teammate Risberg, now remember from the last episode, he's like the muscle. He threatened to kill Joe Jackson if he confessed. Joe also said his fellow teammates Scandal and McMullen told him, you poor simp, go ahead and squawk. We'll say you're a liar. So these are like direct quotes that, came out.
Wow.
One of the most famous lines from the trial came from the aftermath of Joe's confession. A young boy waiting outside of the courtroom asked, "It ain't so, Joe, is it?" To which Jackson replied, "Yes, kid, I'm afraid it is." And it became synonymous with the case being shortened and spread as, "Say it ain't so, Joe." Like, everybody remembers that from the case.
Sad.
Yeah. After Cincinnati and Jackson confessed, Lefty Williams confessed to the grand jury for 3 hours. Oscar Felsch. Now, remember I told you that's Happy Felsch? And I said in the first one that he's, like, super dumb. I was like, he's dumb. So he also confessed in a fashion, not to the grand jury, not in a private meeting with the judge, but he went, he's just an idiot. He spilled all the beans in an interview with the Herald. He admitted getting $5,000, which what he said was what he would have gotten if he had just played the game the right way. And all of the men who confessed in court signed waivers of immunity, which means they signed these waivers of immunity. Now they thought, now these guys, some of them like lefty, like Joe Jackson was like illiterate, and Cincinnati was under the impression that he'd be taken care of. So they signed these waivers of immunity, thinking that it meant that if they confessed, they wouldn't get in trouble. But basically, what they were signing was that they were waiving their immunity and that they would, in fact, be.
Wow.
But they didn't understand what was happening.
They were trapped.
Yes, exactly. So this was especially awful with Joe because he was illiterate and believed his confession he would not be prosecuted. After all the confessions on October 22nd of 1920, the grand jury handed down its indictments, naming 8 Chicago players and 5 gamblers, including Bill Burns, so Sleepy Burns, Sporty Sullivan, and Abe Attell. Rothstein was not indicted because nobody indicated him in their confessions, and they didn't really have any proof because they would rat out each other, but none of them would rat him out.
Right.
Because who would rat out like a mob kingpin?
Not me.
A crazy person. So all the players and the gamblers had the same attorney, which is so crazy.
That
you have
is
like a dozen people with the same one attorney, and his name was William Fallon. Now this guy's a character. He himself is a criminal. He was not much less of a criminal than the men he was defending. He had been accused of rigging juries, including one of his own juries where he was like being tried for basically racketeering and like lying and fraud and stuff. And he rigged that jury.
Oh my God.
And got off. So, yeah. Fallon had Rothstein send Burns and Attell to Canada and Mexico. He's just like, these guys are too much. We need to get rid of them. So Rothstein paid to send these guys out of the country. And then he built a team of attorneys to defend his remaining clients. There's a bit of speculation as to whether Rothstein or Comiskey actually paid for these attorneys because the players couldn't afford them.
Nope.
So who did it? And everyone's like, oh, it was obviously Rothstein. But publicly, Comiskey took a hard stance against the men and he suspended them from his team, while they were under investigation. But the prosecutor would complain that he was getting little to no cooperation from the Chicago club. Like they were not being helpful. So like publicly, he was like, I'm like not condoning this, but privately, he was doing everything in his power to make it insanely difficult to, get these guys. The defendants were arraigned on February 14th, 1921. So this all started in 1919, like the fall of 1919, and we're all the way into February of 21. All the ball players were present, but none of the gamblers showed up to court. I don't understand how. Like this is like all these guys who they were double crossed. They didn't get the money they were supposed to get. They all felt guilty. Like they were sick for what they did. Not all of them. Like Chick and Rosen, what's that guy's name? And McMullen, those guys, they were not sorry. They were jerks. But Lefty and Seacott and Joe Jackson were all like, they felt super guilty. And Felsch. The defendants were arraigned on February 14th. The ball players showed up. The gamblers didn't. Shortly after the indictments had come down, there was a new state's attorney, Robert Lowe. So like while this huge like case of the century is going on in Chicago, they get a new state's attorney. And that's really important. So remember that. After the trial began, it was announced to a shocked community and courtroom that all the players' signed confessions and immunity waivers had been stolen. They were all missing. They couldn't find them.
What?
No, they had copies of them, but those weren't admissible in court.
Right.
Because they're just copies.
It's the originals.
Yeah. Most of the people believe the former Attorney General's secretary had been bribed to steal them by Fallon. Like that's widely believed that he had them stolen.
Wow.
And they later, this is why people think that Comiskey was paying the attorneys and not Rothstein. Those stolen documents were found with Comiskey's stuff after his death, like in his safe.
Jeez.
Yeah. So crazy, right? So the trial was an absolute circus. They fought about the confessions. They had Sleepy Burns on the stand sweating, like he was sweating and whispering. They could barely hear him. He was real cagey when he did show up for court. And he was pointing the finger at Seacott as the ringleader. He kept saying it was Eddie. Eddie did it, not Chick, not any of these other guys. It was Eddie. Comiskey got on, and he testified that he was shocked by all of this. 5 or more gamblers were indicted as the case went on. They kept just like indicting people. I've never heard of you like indicting people as the case went on. So they're just like bringing more people in. Cade Gleason testified that most of the times that Burns had stated he was having these nefarious conversations with Seacott, because it was almost like they were trying to set him up because he confessed first. That they weren't even in Chicago. They were like playing a game somewhere else. These dates that he gave. He's like, Eddie Seacott wasn't in Chicago. He couldn't have been at that hotel. He couldn't have been having this meeting with you because we were playing the Reds in Cincinnati that day. So
That doesn't mean anything.
yeah. So like as trying to like make Eddie Seacott seem like the ringleader when everyone really thinks it was Chick Gandil, but he was like in deep with these guys, so they were trying to like protect him, and he didn't confess. Chick was like one of the only ones that like never confessed. He was a criminal, man. They called him hard scrabble. I'm like, he's a little more than that. Further creating chaos at this trial. This trial was a circus, like I said. They had the Sox players. Remember the Sox were like in 2 gangs, and like the straight-laced guys didn't like the bad boys. But Eddie Seacott was like more of a straight-laced guy that then kind of got wrapped up with the bad guys.
Right.
So they brought the good guys on to the stand, and the defense were like, do you feel like your teammates threw the game? Basically asked them that. Like, do you think they were playing to the best of their ability? And the prosecution lost their mind. They're like, this is like speculation. They're like screaming that they objected, but the judge let it go. So,
oh my gosh.
It was crazy. So Joe Jackson got on the stand, and he said he had changed his mind. And while he did take the $10,000, he played to the best of his ability. He was adamant that he knew about the fix. He said he was going to do it. He took the money, but then he just didn't want to.
What?
So, yeah. So a lot of people feel like Joe Jackson was a victim in this case. If you watch Field of Dreams, for instance, because this is one of the movies that came out that involved this controversy, I think everybody lied about his involvement, even though he took the money and he confessed. People still think he was, coerced or maybe innocent. Billy Marg was the state's final witness. Now, remember, that's the guy that gave the interview. He was the boxer that ran money for Rothstein. So this guy was like really entangled in all this. The gambler confirmed Burns' story about the initial meeting in New York involving Seacott and Gandil. So now he's saying Eddie Seacott was there, but so was Gandil. Marg testified that Attell told them that Rothstein, now he's the first one that said Rothstein had agreed to finance the fix in return of he had saved Rothstein's life. So basically, Attell allegedly saved Rothstein's life. So Rothstein's like, yeah, I'll fund your World Series thing, whatever, The like freaking wild story. Like, what?
Yeah.
So,
fund my life.
Yeah. So he said that the first payment of $10,000 to Burns came when Attell pulled the money from a great pile of bills under his mattress. Like he just like pulled out stacks of cash, and then he paid that to Burns. Money that Rothstein had apparently sent by wire. Like he wired the money. But as Rothstein wasn't even on trial because he was never indicted because during the grand jury, the convening of the grand jury, like nobody indicated him. And so now he's not on trial, and none of this matters. It wasn't the smoking gun that it would sound like to have these guys being like, yeah, Rothstein was involved. With the confessions being allowed, the copies of the confessions, but severely redacted, they were ridiculous because they would have the guys get up and read their confessions, but they could only say things that would affect them. Like they couldn't be like, yes, I spoke with Burns on this date. It would be like, hi, I am Eddie Seacott, and I spoke with someone on this date. And it was so redacted that it didn't make sense, and it was like a joke.
Makes them look incompetent.
It made the whole court case was like it was a joke.
Yeah.
It felt like a farce. The court case was as much of a farce as the game had been. The biggest blow for them, though, for the prosecution came when the judge told the jury they could only find the men guilty if the player intended to defraud the public and others and not merely throw the ball game. So basically,
What?
there weren't laws against throwing baseball games. There
Wow.
weren't laws about gambling on baseball games. So the only law that these guys would technically be breaking at this time is if they were intentionally trying to defraud the White Sox, like club. And that's it. Like if they weren't just doing it because they wanted the money, if they were trying to like bring down the White Sox as an organization, that would be a crime. Nothing else was. The New York Times editorialized that the judge's instruction was like saying the state must prove the defendant intended to murder his victim, not merely cut off his head.
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense. But again, until this happened, there weren't laws against this.
True.
So you like a lot of times you know the laws are like reactionary when a crime
They
happens.
set precedents.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So on July 29th, Edward Prinville summed up the case for the prosecution. And I'm actually going to read his like final statements because they were really good. He told the jury that, and I quote, Joe Jackson, Eddie Seacott, and Claude Williams sold out the American public for a paltry $20,000. This game, gentlemen, has been the subject of crime. The public, the club owners, even the small boys on the sandlots have been swindled. They have taken our national sport, our national pleasure, and tried to turn it into a con game. He was really mean to Seacott, too. Seacott, the American League's greatest pitcher, hurling with a heavy heart by his own confession and a pocket made heavy by $10,000 in graft, was beaten 9-1. No wonder he lost. The pocket loaded with filth for which he sold his soul and his friends was too much. It overbalanced him, and he lost.
Mm-hmm.
He asked the jury to return a verdict of guilty with 5 years in the penitentiary and a fine of $2,000 for each defendant. So basically their whole year's salary.
That's horrible. That's not even right.
Well, I mean, what he said was right. But thousands of men through the chilly hours of the night crouched in line waiting for the opening of the World Series game. All morning they waited, eating a sandwich perhaps and never daring to leave their places for a moment. There they waited to see the great Seacott pitch a ball game. Gentlemen, they went to see a ball game, but what they saw was a con game.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was pretty eloquent. Now, Ben Short, one of the multitudinous defense lawyers, got up, and he said there may have been an agreement entered into by the defendants to take the gamblers' money, but it has not been shown that the players had any intention of defrauding the public or bringing the game into ill repute. They believe that any arrangement they made was a secret one and would therefore reflect no discredit on the national pastime or injure the business of their employer, as it would never be detected. Someone else said that, or another lawyer said that the real guilty party was Arnold Rothstein, and he wasn't in the courtroom. Like how, he's the one that did the whole thing. Why was he not indicted? Why were these underpaid ball players, these penny ante gamblers, who may have been a few nickels on the World Series, brought here to be the goats in this case? So basically, they all knew Rothstein was never going to be indicted on this because nobody would say that he would, except for, Marg, which I can't believe he did that. But nobody would testify against him in court. And so they could be like, he's the one who did it. Like, these guys should all just get off, right? And he was not wrong. And technically, they didn't break the law. That was the only law that they could put them under for. After a mere 3 hours, the jury came back not guilty. The courtroom erupted. And the players expressed sincere relief to the media, but their joy at not being convicted would be short-lived. Like, they were so relieved. And then immediately, it was all taken away.
Oh, great.
This case has long-reaching implications. Prior to the scandal, there was no baseball commissioner. like there was just like I said, it was the two leagues, and then like they each
Right.
had like representatives and stuff, but there wasn't like any like oversight. After this, they appointed their first commissioner. Judge, this guy's name is awesome. Are you ready for it?
Okay, I'm ready.
Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis. That is this man's name. Like, it's the best name.
Who hated him?
His mom thought he was amazing, and he grew up to be like a mountain of a man. He was like strong. He was a rock. He lived up to his name. This guy was awesome.
Wow.
So, yes. Landis was like a really great commissioner. His first act of business was to permanently ban all 8 of the men involved from ever playing again. Like they were like, so they had been suspended by Comiskey, which I think he
Right.
thought when it was all said and done, if they came back, he could bring them back. The commissioner said, nope, nope.
Wow.
He released this statement, and like I'm gonna link it in the show notes because you guys have to go listen to this man speak. It was incredible. I listened to like the actual clip of him saying this statement, and it like chills. He said, regardless of the verdict of juries, no player who throws a ball game, no player that undertakes or promises to throw a ball game, no player that sits in conference with a bunch of crooked players and gamblers where the ways and means of throwing a game are discussed and does not promptly tell his club about it will ever play professional baseball. So that kind of screwed Buck Weaver because he didn't throw the game, but he knew, and he admitted that he knew, and he didn't tell anybody.
Wow.
Landis was absolutely serious. Like, none of the 8 men involved, including Buck Weaver, who was aware of the fix but adamantly refused to participate, were ever allowed to play again. They never played again.
Wow.
Yeah. Landis was an incredible commissioner. We felt that the Black Sox scandal had been infiltrated and initiated by people involved in horse racing, and stated that, by God, as long as I have anything to do with this game, they'll never get another hold on it. In 1921, his first season as commissioner, the New York Giants owner Charles Stoneham and manager John McCraw purchased Oriental Park Racetrack in Havana, Cuba. Landis gave Stoneham and McGraw an ultimatum. They cannot be involved in both baseball and horse track racing. They quickly quit and put the track on the market. So they sold it because they chose baseball over horse racing. Landis fought for players, drafts, fair pay, trades, and even race equality. Like, he was very much like, his like views were considered liberal at that time, but like, in my opinion, just like normal. Like, everyone should get to play.
Right.
These contracts are unfair. There should be a farm system. Everybody should have a chance. You should be able to like leave a team that you're unsatisfied with.
Right.
It was a very progressive way of thinking in the way that baseball was currently being run. And he was like very player forward. He loved the game. Like, I listened to a lot of the stuff that he would say, and I read some stuff about him. He was very much super passionate about baseball. Like, they couldn't have picked a better commissioner. And he was intelligent. He was a judge. He was well suited.
A win-win.
Yeah. So last real fallout from all of this was Joe Jackson. He and Buck Weaver are the two most sympathetic people in this whole story. Shoeless Joe Jackson, the man with the 3rd highest lifetime batting average in baseball, behind only Cobb and Hornsby, be admitted into the Hall of Fame because he wasn't allowed to be. His actions in 1919 dishonored the game, but he wasn't a ringleader in the fix, and he came to regret his role. Over the years, many fans and former players, including the great Ted Williams, have argued for Joe Jackson's enshrinement at Cooperstown. They want him to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Williams said, and that's lefty, Joe shouldn't have accepted the money. He realized his error. He tried to give the money back. He tried to tell Comiskey about the fix, but they wouldn't listen. Comiskey covered it up as much as Jackson did, maybe more. And there's Charlie Albert Comiskey down the aisle from me at Cooperstown, and Shoeless Joe still waits outside.
Wow.
I want to end here. I think like that's pretty much it as far as like all of this goes. Like, these men went on to do post scandal is pretty like crazy, but it would be like another 3 shows. And this one's already been longer than what I wanted it to be, but I'm telling you, it was so crazy. Like all the fallout, the trial, the way that the laws worked back then,
Right.
it was so interesting.
I think it's really interesting when you learn, like, for me, I mean, I love law, and so, like, you know that somebody had to be the example at some point to make a law to, like I said, have that precedent, because they don't just make them. They're, like, first degree murder, they don't just make that. Like, somebody had to have done something, and just think of how many before that got away with it
Yeah.
until somebody was used as an example. And so
Like
it's really.
The Cubs did it first.
Yep.
And nothing happened. So that made the Sox think, oh, we can do it.
Yep. It's a really, really stupid way to think, especially nowadays. I mean, you can't really think that way nowadays because you are most likely the one that's going to get caught. Like,
Oh yeah.
hmm?
Now there's tons of cameras and stuff. You're definitely gonna
I
get
know.
caught.
I ain't
But
doing
back
crap.
then,
I don't know.
yeah.
Everybody's got a Ring camera. Everybody's got cameras.
I
Everybody's
joke all the time that I feel like an honest person with the and I think I am, but also I'm like terrified of getting caught doing something bad. Am I
I'm the
good if
same
I
way.
only don't do bad stuff because I'm scared of getting caught?
Well, and I think it's just kind of like, the way I talk in person is the way I talk in text, and if I'm not gonna say something that I won't regret, I mean, I think that's just kind of, what in life you should just do things that, if you're confronted about it, that you're gonna be like, yeah, you're gonna own it.
I said it. I did
Yep,
it. These
I
guys
did
all
it.
regret
I'll
it.
do it to your face too. No, I was kidding.
I feel bad. Like a lot of these guys, they were
Yeah,
Ed Seacott. He talked about how he had bought a farm and he needed the money and he thought he could help his
desperate.
family. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
It's not a good enough reason, but he is pretty sympathetic to me as like a person in this, and Joe Jackson too. I just feel like Joe wasn't like exactly smart enough to understand
right.
what he was, doing. I
That's
mean, he
just
knew he was wrong, but also, you know,
totally
what a bummer. Well, I hope you guys found this whole case as crazy and intriguing and kind of like wild as I did. This case was like considered the case of the of its day. It was like
right.
think about the O.J. Simpson case or you know any like big major case of that era. My next one I'm gonna cover is like another one where it was like the case of the era where everybody was like it's that precedent and people were
Right.
obsessed with it. We talk about this like in how like it affects us, but like crime, people like true crime because it's like written television. You don't have to do anything. You just transcribe what happens in court and you tell people about it. And this was like the first case in that like that really like gripped the nation because it was baseball. It was the America's pastime and it was really crazy what was happening. So I think that it was an important one to talk about. I know I found it really intriguing, and now I'm like
Very.
obsessed with 1900s baseball. And I didn't think that would ever be a thing that I would say, but it's true. So
Right.
thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. And, go ahead and give us a little like, follow, subscribe if you want to keep hearing more crazy sports true crime stories.
Hello Kitty, me gusta mi titties, me gusta mi booty, hoy me tomo un selfie con filtro Hello Kitty.